Hello everyone, welcome to session 15 of LTEC 654, Programming Games and Simulations. Last week, we talked about some of the building blocks of computer science, concepts and practices. In other words, what we need to know to program Godot and what we need to do in order to program in Godot. Now, we also talked about some of the foundational programming concepts, such as algorithms, variables, control, modularity, and program development. Now, this week, I want to give you one more tool that fits in the variable category. And what that concept is actually called an array. And I want to introduce you to this important concept. And to do that, let's take a look at this simple example. So I have some code here. It's only 8 lines long. And you can see in lines 3, 4, and 5, I have 3 variables, A1, A2, A3, and each one is storing a string. Peter, Paul, and Mary. And then when my code runs, the ready function executes, and line 8 is a print instruction, which says print first name plus A1. And so, of course, the output of this would be first name colon Peter. Super simple. We understand this. We know how to do it. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I want to emphasize the idea that variables can only store one piece of data. Let's contrast that to what we can do with arrays. Arrays are a data structure, or you can think of it as kind of like a type of variable, but it's a data structure that's designed to hold multiple pieces of information. So take a look here. In line 3, we have variable array. Now, I named this array. I could have called it anything. I could have called it A, I could have called it A1, anything at all. I just happened to name it array. And then it says equals, and I have square brackets, and then I'm holding 3 strings, Peter, comma, Paul, comma, Mary. So in other words, this one variable named array is holding 3 pieces of information. And that's possible because it is an array. So take a look at my ready function now. If I look at line 6, it says print first name. And then I have to pass the array. I have to tell the array what value I want to print. So I'm telling Godot to print the value at position 0. And of course, if we do that, the output would be first name Peter, because Peter is the first value in the array. Remember, computers start counting from 0, so 0, 1, 2, even though there's 3 items in the array. So let's take a look at this example. Here, everything's exactly the same, but line 6 says first name, array, index 1. Notice the square brackets there. What would be the result? Well, the output would be first name colon Paul, because we actually want the second item, or the item at index 1. Very simple. Now, take a look at this example. In line 6, I'm saying first name colon plus array index 3. Now, what would the output of this be? Well, this would actually give us an error. Why? Well, the error is because there is no value in the array, named array, at index 3. That's because the computer starts counting at 0. Peter is at 0, Paul is at 1, Mary is at 2. So if we ask Godot to get the data at position 3, it's going to complain. And this is the error that you will see, invalid get index 3. Okay, so it's very important that we know how many elements are in the array. Now, fortunately, arrays have a number of methods that we can use that are quite useful. Now, one of those methods is the size method, which allows us to figure out how many elements are stored in the array. So take a look at line 6. It says print, there are array size. I want to get the size of the array. And of course, that's going to give me a number, so I have to turn it into a string by just wrapping it in the string statement. And if I do that, the output here would be there are 3 items. And that number 3 in that output is coming from the array.size method. Very handy. Here's another example. We can also add values to an array. So take a look at line 6. I say array.append, and then in parentheses, whatever value I want to add to the end of the array. In this case, I'm adding the name Joseph. And I have two print statements, and I would find out after I append the string Joseph to the end of my array, I would find out that the size of my array has grown from 3 to 4, and now I can actually tell the array to print out the name at position 3, and that string would actually be Joseph. Now, another important thing that arrays can do is it can count things for us. So far we've learned how to get the size of an array, but take a look at this example. In line 3, I've changed the array now. Now it doesn't hold strings anymore, it holds integers. And I've got a whole bunch of random numbers in here. So one of the things we might want to do when we're programming is find out in that big long list of numbers, I think there's 12 in there, how many ones are in that list. Well, conveniently, the array class has a method called count. And if you look at line 6, I'm saying array.count, and I'm asking it to count the number ones. And so the output of that print statement would be this. There are 5 ones. Super simple and very handy. And here's another example of using the size method with my longer array. And of course, it would tell me there are 12 items. Another thing that arrays can do is tell us what is the minimum value and the maximum value of all of the values in the array. And so how do you do that? Well, take a look. Array.min, array.max. And what would be the output here? It would say the smallest number is number 1. And the biggest number is number 5. And so the min and max methods of the array class, they're just designed to figure out to read all of the numbers in the array and tell us which one's the smallest and which one's the biggest. Now, here's another example of the clear function. And sometimes we want to erase everything that's in our array. And the way we do that is we would use the clear method as shown in line 7. So as you can see in line 6, I have a print statement that's going to tell me the size of my array. Then I'm going to clear the array in line 7. In line 8, I'm going to print out the new size of the array. And so the output here would be there are 12 items, and then because I've cleared out the array, there are 0 items. Very simple. Now, one of the questions you might be asking yourself is, well, how do we use arrays in the real world? Well, I want to show you an example. So far, when we've wanted to add new scenes to our projects, we have written custom functions designed to load every scene. So for example, we said add scene 1, add scene 2, add scene 3, and those are all separate functions. But now with arrays, we can write much more efficient code. So take a look at this example. In line 3, I've declared an array and I'm passing it the name of 3 scenes. Scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. And then in line 4, I have a global variable called current scene, and it's equal to 0. When my code executes, the ready function is going to run, and then I'm going to manually call load next scene. Let's take a look at that function. Well, the first thing that function does is creates a format string. So I say format string equals, and then I'm pointing to my resources folder, and then %s, I'm getting a simple string variable. And then in my actual string, I'm saying take that format string and insert a variable from my array. And which value do I want out of my array? I want the value at index current scene. And right now, current scene is set to 0, which means if I go back to my array and I look which item is at position 0, it's scene 1. And now what I can do with that is I could say in line 12, I want to load that actual string, create an instance of it, and then I'm going to set the name property of that variable s to be equal to the current scene out of my array, and then I'm going to add that child. So what does this do? Well, all this does is it loads scene 1 and adds it as a child to my main scene. The power of this, however, is I can reuse this function anytime I want to load a new scene. And so you could imagine if my project has a next button, when I click the next button, I want to increment the value of the variable current scene, and then all I have to do is call the load next scene function. And this function is completely dynamic, and it will load either scene 1, scene 2, or scene 3 whenever I need it to. And so I can use this one function to load all of my scenes instead of writing multiple functions, one for each scene that needs to be loaded. And that's an example of the power of arrays. Okay, that's all for today. I just want to leave you with a quick look at the calendar. Believe it or not, we are well into week 15 at this point. Next week will be our final full week. And I want to remind you that game production project number 2 is due on Monday, May 11th. Next week, we'll talk a little bit about loops. And finally, I'll do a short culminating video at the end of the semester to wrap up things. Okay, everyone, we're out of time for today. Have a great week, and I'll see you in Canvas.